What's up guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're just going to have a high-level discussion on different things you can do or return in Spring Boot. That way you can do your own learning depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So we've already returned a string. That was the first thing we did with our project. Of course, you can return a response entity, which includes a status, or it could be a status and a body. We've already done that. You can return it in the form of JSON, or you could return it in a different format, which we will explore shortly. You can return files, so a PDF, an Excel spreadsheet, a PNG image. You can return streaming video or streaming audio or even streaming text. You can directly return HTML or XML by using Thymeleaf. I'll show you a quick example of this. Even though it's not used very frequently, it is good to understand a way in which you can do this. And server sent events, I'll give you a brief overview, but we'll probably have a more in-depth video on this later. So we've already been returning JSON or JavaScript object notation. That's the one with the squirrely braces and the commas. But you can represent the data in the exact same way using YAML. YAML stands for YAML Ain't Markup Language, or Yet Another Markup Language. And it's the same thing, it just doesn't have commas and doesn't have squirrely braces. Instead, it relies on indentations. So it kind of looks more like a Python developer wrote this. Moving on, you can return HTML directly using a templating engine, and that's what Thymeleaf is. This is something that is built into Spring Boot. Basically, you have an HTML file with variables, and then you set the values of the variables and return the HTML template. So here's an example. We have a very basic HTML template with head and body, and if you look about halfway down, we see name, and then name in squirrely braces. And what's going to happen is this is your variable. We can assign data to it, which will then be sent back to the client. We have isAdmin, which is a Boolean, and then we can even have a list of strings that propagate an unordered list in HTML. This is what our controller would look like. So we have the controller annotation, we have the get mapping, we have a method. None of these things should be surprising, but we pass in a model, which is an HTML template. We then add the attributes to it, saying name is going to be John Doe, isAdmin is going to be true, and items will be an array list of strings. And then we return the example.html. This would be a file living in your project directory. And then when it gets sent back to the client, it has the actual name of John Doe, it prints out you are an administrator, and it has the list of items in our unordered list. So the big question is Thymeleaf used? It's not very common with front-end frameworks now. With Angular, React, Vue, or even iOS and Android acting as the front end, Thymeleaf is not really used, but it is good to know what a templating engine is, because this used to be used a lot more back before front-end frameworks became really popular. Also, this is known as server-side rendering, meaning the entire HTML is rendered on the server and then just sent straight back to the client. In today's world, we have client-side rendering, meaning React and Angular handle the rendering on your local computer and then go make HTTP requests to get data and incorporate it into the view. So we're not going to cover much more about Thymeleaf. I just wanted to point it out, and if you're interested in this, you can certainly do your own research, but in my experience, this is not something you're probably going to be using if you're working on a modern application. And the last thing I'll cover here is a server sent event. I think I'll do a full video on this in the future, but basically this is a continuous connection between the client and server, and this is useful for real-time updates. So for example, if you're building an app that has a Bitcoin live tracker where every 10 milliseconds you need to know the exact price of Bitcoin. Perhaps you're building a social media app where the notifications constantly come in. Perhaps even ChatGPT is using it, where it keeps sending parts of the response as they are generated, because it's not all generated at once. So perhaps every 500 milliseconds it sends the next part of the response. Typically, with a server-sent event, the client will make a request, and then the server keeps pinging the client until the connection is closed. Okay guys, that's all for this video. I just want you to think about all the different things you could possibly do, and we're not going to cover every single one in these tutorial videos, but it is important to understand kind of the realm and the different directions you could take and how to dive deeper into certain aspects of backend. Okay, on to the next video.